Although the proverbial bell hasn't been rung as yet, by the looks and feels of things, we are surely on the brink of an election season. But what does that bring in the middle of a pandemic? Welcome to On the Record. I'm your guest host this week, Jessica Robertson, and I'm so glad you've tuned in. As prospective and ratified candidates begin to make their mark, we're already seeing the billboards go up and ads swarm our social media outlets in preparation for the upcoming 2022 general election. And while Free National Movement Chairman Collin Ingraham has made it vehemently clear that he's not had any indication that Prime Minister Minnis will call an early election, it still does not negate the fact that we could very well be headed to the polls before May of 2022. Tonight On the Record covers the psychology of politics as we speak with veterans in the field of politics who know what it takes to run a successful campaign. Don't move. We begin our conversation after this break.
Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits. Venture into unknown territory. We take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV Cable Channel 212 and streaming live on Facebook on the R News Bahamas page.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. I'm your host, Jessica Robertson, and tonight we're discussing the psychology of politics. Despite an election not being due for another 15 months or so, the governing Free National Movement has already ratified 25 candidates. This, of course, has caused both the PLP and the DNA to begin their process in expectation of a possible early election. However, FNM Chairman Collin Ingraham is adamant that it has always been the FNM's practice to begin campaign preparations as early as 2 years before an election. My guest for this segment of the show is from the governing party and has been involved in politics since 1986. He is a former chairperson for the FNM's Marathon Association, former National Public Relations chairperson, and is presently a national executive member for the Free National Movement. Help me welcome Mr. Collin Ingraham. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Great. So it seems like there's we haven't heard the bell ringing, but it seems like something's been rung somewhere.
Yes, there is some level of excitement in the air, anticipation based on the fact that both of the major parties have started the process of ratifying candidates. And so it has a lot of persons wondering what's happening and hoping in some circles that it means an early election, and others who simply just don't want to be caught with the pants down, so they're doing what they think is necessary.
Yeah, so let's jump in. How does this election is going to be unlike any other if for no other reason than COVID? With the emergency orders creating a very different world than we've ever been used to. So how does that change the landscape of politics as it relates to the usual things that are done during an election season?
Well, what will happen, and I do have some experience because I'm doing a project in the Turks and Caicos, and I'm watching, they have their elections scheduled for tomorrow. So I took notice of how they had to conduct their election in the height of COVID. the biggest impact actually is going to be on rallies. If we're still in the situation we're in whenever the elections are called, you certainly could not have the mega rallies and rallies, period, due to the fact that it would be a major spreader of COVID. So that would be the largest thing that was going to be impacted by campaign. Now, with regards to the house-to-house, people, well, both of the major parties are on the ground, doing their best to practice social distancing, even as they go door to door. Some people that's a put off because there are persons who are actually very fearful of COVID, and so from our perspective, we have to be we're being sensitive, asking the questions. Are you comfortable with us having this conversation with our people coming in to your door, and we're going to be socially responsible, but that is a challenge. So we're going to have to manage the concerns of the residents and citizens of our country as we move forward to spread the message of the great job that the Free National Movement has done thus far.
And how big of a conversation has it been so far with the candidates, with their teams about these are the things that you really have to be aware of? It's not business as usual this go round, guys.
It is absolutely not business as usual. Fortunately, we're in a time where we have such powerful social media opportunities to be able to campaign to people in a very different way. And it's going to be critical for the parties, especially the Free National Movement. I'm speaking on our behalf. It's going to be critical for us to be able to maximize the technology and how to be able to contact our voters in a different form. And I know it may be challenging for the older voters, but quite frankly, many of the older voters are now using smartphones just as much as the younger voters. But that use of technology and how you're going to be able to target the persons you're seeking to communicate with and sell your message, that's going to be critical. And yes, it's going to be different. So for those persons who don't believe in even Zoom meetings and using the various kinds of tools to be able to pull people in, to hear your message, to be able to connect with that candidate, or reconnect with a member of parliament, you're going to have to make that adjustment because COVID just won't allow for us to just solely go and do things as we have done before.
I don't know if I can imagine a campaign season here with no rallies. That's like saying there's no John Canoe.
Exactly. And if you think about it, the rallies really are used significantly to appeal to young people. And so that's why you have all the entertainment and the music and the motorcades and all of those kinds of things to be able to attract them and connect with them as you're attracting them with the use of entertainment. So now you have, let's say, for example, we don't know when the Prime Minister is going to call it election. But if it's called anytime soon, certainly COVID would have a greater impact as opposed to if we were to go the full term and we have the vaccine and the majority of persons take the vaccine and reach what they call herd immunity, then there may be some variance of what we're used to. However, if it is done anytime soon, we're going to be challenged like other countries who have held elections. You could think about in the United States where they had virtual conventions for the most part, certainly on the Democratic side. And then the same thing is happening in the Turks and Caicos, which is our very close neighbor, who all of their rallies on the governing side has been virtual. So that is going to be, if we are to go early, as some people suppose, but I'm going to take my chairman's word that there's nothing afoot. We are going to go our full term, and we're going to do what is necessary to connect with people. But COVID is a significant challenge.
Absolutely. Given the current economic and unstable global environment that we find ourselves in, do you anticipate that candidates and parties are going to take a more guarded approach in terms of promises made on the campaign trail? I can promise you the sun and the stars, but the reality is.
Well, from me, I'm a business person, and I can tell you, um, with the introduction of the vaccines, and in fact, in just conversations with persons who I'm doing business with in the United States, there's a lot of hope that um, things are going to become more normalized. Um, uh, in fact, I spoke to one person yesterday who said to me he's more busy than pre-COVID. So there is a lot of hope. And then you got to also take into fact that there's a lot of investments and stuff that was stopped and stalled. And so there are a lot of people who are holding back, who are biting at the bit to be able to get back in the game, be able to sell their products or service or to build or design. And quite frankly, this is a good time if you're in the development or construction field to be doing that kind of things. This is time to address infrastructure and building and those kinds of things, so that on coming out of the backside of this COVID pandemic, you will be strategically positioned to be able to take advantage of the many opportunities and the many pent-up demands that await.
What are you getting in terms, you're on the ground, what is your sense of the interest level of the average Bahamian in politics, in an election right now? Because I'm hearing a lot of people, they're just not there. They're worried about where's tonight's meal coming from. How do you get people engaged and interested enough to participate?
Well, firstly, historically, the Bahamas has always, you hear a lot of that during any campaign. And then you start to see the emergence of many smaller parties or independent persons. That's a natural course of every election historically. But the Bahamas actually should be the country that is the example of what a democracy is, because we participate in our election. The lowest turnout was in 1987. It was around 87.9%, and for most countries that is a high. And in 1997 it was as high as 98.5%. Yes, people are concerned about the kitchen table issues. Yes, people are concerned about their health. Yes, people are concerned about the fact that it's being a challenging period with regards to jobs, opportunities to be able to take care of their family, to earning revenue, etc. But at the end of the day, Bahamians vote. Bahamians want a say in the direction of their country. We will complain, we will do whatever the case may be, but at the end of the day, we vote. And so I expect that, yes, we're going to have the persons who are going to be complaining with all manner of issues. But in the end of the day, we're going to show up to the polls, and I'm asking for, when we do show up for those polls, that we are socially responsible in how we go about doing that, and pursue and do our God-given right and constitutional right to vote and choose the government of your choice, which we expect to be the Free National Movement.
So what you're saying is, don't mind the grumblings a year out, that historically Bahamians have always come out to the polls in large numbers. We take this is our God-given right, and we're going to exercise it. And you're satisfied that no matter what's being said right now, that Bahamians are going to show up?
We're going to show up. We're absolutely going to show up. We take our vote extremely seriously. We take having the opportunity to say to a government that we support you or not. So we're going to show up at the end of the day.
So how does the FNM, you've had a hard run of it. I mean, Dorian, pandemic. Mm-hmm. How do you convince the electorate to give you another shot?
Well, I had this conversation with a number of persons recently, and the fact of the matter is that in spite of we have had the worst storm in the history of the Western Hemisphere, despite that we are now being challenged by a unbelievably terrible pandemic that has affected every aspect of our life, impacted every decision a government must make at this time. This government has done an outstanding job. And the proof is in the fact that international agencies are commending the Bahamas on our handling. It isn't perfect, by no stretch of the imagination, because no one is perfect. No government is perfect. None of us are. but we have handled it better than most of the countries on this planet. And the funny part is the opposition took the opportunity to try to stick us with various countries around the region, and now only to see that all of those countries that we're using as an example are now in a worse position than us. So from the terms of just the handling of COVID, the government has done an excellent job, and it's reflected in the actual statistics. Not my feelings, not how I feel about it, what the reality is. Now, what we have to be as a government is sensitive to the pain of not being able to connect with a loved one when they're dying or when they and we as particularly as a dominantly black people, there's a certain way that we mourn. You know, those wakes the night before is an important part of our psyche and connecting with our family and connecting with the person who's passed. So all of those things are stressing our people and being a challenge. But when you think about our legislative agenda, when you think about the fact that we've now offered assistance to thousands of families and thousands of young persons to go into preschool, and when you think about the opportunity for persons to at BTVI, not just the University of Bahamas, which I used to be, but at BTVI, who now have an opportunity for free education if they're going full time and under 25. This is a government that is thinking about people. When you think about the fact that this government has moved the opportunity for investment into small businesses and diversification of the economy, moving it from about a couple million to $55 million per year. So this is a government has done the heavy lifting. This is a government that is focused and determined. Are there challenges? Yes. Do we need to do a better job of letting people and reminding them of what we've done in spite of Dorian, in spite of COVID? Absolutely.
Okay.
So this government has done an exceptional job.
All right, well, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this break.
Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook.
Welcome back to On the Record, the psychology of politics. I'm your host, Jessica Robertson, and tonight we're discussing the psychology of politics with Mr. Collin Ingraham. So, Mr. Ingraham, the FNM has so far ratified, I think it is 25 candidates. The PLP, I think 18. They may have done some more last night, I'm not sure. What do you think about both parties' slate of candidates thus far, and what do you think of the DNA's candidates that they're putting out? Anything standing out in terms of who the parties are choosing to put forward?
Well, to be truthful, I am not really paying much attention to what the DNA or the PLP are putting out. I'm focused as a part of the candidates committee on those persons that we are ratifying. I'm part of the team that's seeking to ensure that those who we do ratify properly trained as soon as possible, so that when we go out, we can ensure that we have precise messaging. We are seeking to connect and listen to people and appreciate the fact that these are really challenging times, and that we as candidates and persons who are members of parliament must be empathetic, understand the plight, understand the challenges, don't be dismissive. Don't get so caught up in trying to win that you do not appreciate the challenges people are facing. And I think if we, on our side, with our candidates, if our candidates pay attention and listen to people, because politics, ultimately, everything that we do, all the policies and legislations and things that we pass is for the betterment of the people of the Bahamas. And so once our candidates are cognizant of that and listen carefully to our people, and then seek to put the policies and legislations and programs in place and bring people along. You may be doing the right thing, but if you do not connect and sell it right to people, they feel frustrated, they feel disillusioned, they feel disconnected. So it's critical that our candidates on the Free National Movement side appreciate that. And once we do that, I'm satisfied that the Bahamian people, despite all of COVID, despite Dorian, despite all of the challenges we are facing, even if it's in spite of what some may argue has been poor public relations or poor messaging to our people, we will be successful.
So one of the differences that I noticed right off the bat is the F&M, all familiar faces. I'm not sure that there's a lot of new blood coming in for this election. The PLP, on the other hand, seems to be a lot of new faces, newcomers to the political scene. What does that tell us about the strategies of each party?
What that told us is that the PLP was decimated in the last election, and so they had very few seats in the House. So they had opportunity for far more new candidates to bring on in this cycle. We have selected 6 new candidates thus far, and I'm sure there are going to be additional candidates as we complete our process. But the reality is, most of the persons who are in this time with the governing party, the Free National Movement, they are relatively new. Most of them, this is their first time. So technically speaking, they're still relatively new as far as politics go. But yes, PLP would be bringing a lot more because they have a lot more space available. But be assured, those persons that we do bring in terms of our strategy, the leadership and the candidates committee, which I'm a part of, we're seeking to try our best to select properly, ensure that those persons who we do select connect, and those who persons may have some issues with, and at the constituency level, that they understand that you need to go to those people and take whatever blows, but you have to open up and accept the criticism and determine that you are going to do better, that you are going to do the things necessary to connect with the people and cause them to want to once again elect you and believe in your messaging. And as they can see the party is working, despite all of the challenges, they can see the government has put an aggressive legislative agenda. And prior to COVID, we were doing exceptionally well in tourism. We had, if people care to remember, we had begun to fix the economic malaise that was left by the PLP. For the first time in over a decade, we had our deficit shrinking. So there were things that we were doing. And if you see, there was a slew of legislation just passed related to the financial standing of the country. So this is something that the government has been committed to from day one and continues to be committed to. We have to be able to properly manage this company for the betterment of Bahamians. And it's not easy. This isn't fun. This isn't exciting. This isn't sexy. But it's the hard work. It is the heavy lifting necessary for our people's future. So, it's about your future.
So are the Bahamian people voting person or party this go round?
We are still a two-party country. In fact, most of the world is two-party. And the reason is that we're homogenous people. We're not one of those large countries that has a lot of different cultures and sects and persons from different countries that settled in the country. So for the foreseeable future, it will be a two-party system. Okay. However, people are going to pay attention to that person, that personality, that person who they've entrusted or who has been entrusted, and whether or not that particular person is listening, paying attention, doing the things to help them have a better quality of life.
Okay, so we're getting towards the end of the segment, but I wanted to hit on this. Is, you know, the bell hasn't been rung, but we know an election's a little over a year away at the very latest. And I'm seeing, I don't know about you, but everywhere I go online right now, it is politics. The money's being spent, the algorithms are working, it's showing up, the WhatsApp chat groups are sending things out, and it seems particularly nasty and gutter-like More so than probably I think I've seen any time in the past. What's that all about? Why are we starting out in this proverbial gutter and dogging the opponents rather than putting forward what you got to offer?
Here is the challenge we face. Social media. The anonymity of social media, people feeling comfortable because they are not in front of someone else, to be able to say and spread all manner of things and feel just totally disconnected to it. And it just makes people more comfortable with being nasty, with those kinds of things. It is incumbent upon those persons who are vying as candidates to say to people, this is not necessary. I heard someone from the PLP a few days ago, and he was out there with his team, and he said, this is the message we're spreading. We're empathetic, and the FNM is the enemy. Not this one isn't the enemy. We're not enemies. We're not enemies. We are opponents. We oppose. We believe that we, as a party, as an organization, have the best ideas to transform a country for the better. That doesn't make us enemies. We are all Bahamians. We are all a part of this aquamarine, gold, and black. We are all a part of the 242. So let's take that out, because if the leadership, if the candidates are pushing those kinds of things, that kind of narrative that we're enemies, it's going to get really, really nasty. And that's sad. We are all Bahamians who love our country. We just have opposing views of how to get it done.
So you're saying that this is not the message coming from the party machinery.
I would hate to believe that any party, and I've been public relations chair for the Free National Movement going into the last general election 4 years. And that is not something that we ever push. That is not something that I would ever condone. Because we are Bahamians. And it is important after the election that we minimize the kinds of nasty things and disrespectful things and hating on people and focusing on personality rather than the issue, focusing on the person rather than the legislative agenda, rather than the platform. That's the things that we should be debating. That's the things we should be discussing. We should discuss it passionately because we love our country and we want better for our country. But it should never be about demonizing the other person. It should never be about destroying that person. It should never be, because when you destroy him or her, you are destroying yourself, because all of us are Bahamians.
Well, let's hope that you can get that message out to all involved and that we can run a clean election on the issues that really and truly matter. Thank you so much, Mr. Ingraham. And we greatly appreciate you being with us today and look forward to having you again. And when we return, we will speak with veteran politician V. Alfred Gray. You're not going to miss that.
Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits. Venture into unknown territory. We take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV Cable Channel 212 and streaming live on Facebook on the R News Bahamas page.
Welcome back to On the Record. I'm your guest host, Jessica Robertson, and tonight we bring you the psychology of politics. While elections are something we are accustomed to having every 5 years, and in some instances even look forward to, we cannot deny that there is something quite different about this one. It comes with its own set of unique challenges. Aside from the COVID pandemic, unemployment, other social ills being experienced in the country, there are even more factors that could affect this election more than we know at this time. Here to help us understand some of these factors is a veteran with more than 30 years in the field of politics, in the front line and working behind the scenes. He is a former Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Local Government and former MP for the Michael constituency. Please help me welcome Mr. V. Alfred Gray. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Well, it's a delight for me to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Wonderful. So this election, you've been at this for 30 years. This one's hitting a bit different, it seems.
Well, all elections have their particular advantages and disadvantages. It depends on who's looking. But for my part, this one is going to be interesting.
Interesting meaning what?
Well, it's going to be interesting because the playing field seemed to be more virtual than it used to be. The pandemic, in my view, would change the way you campaign unless they remove those things which prevent people from, my words, going house to house and having on the park rallies and stuff like that. And more often than not, the Bahamian electorate look forward to campaign as usual, but that's not going to be this time unless some things change and change quickly.
So how do the candidates, especially the new ones, the PLP's got a lot of newcomers to this scene. How do you get out there? Bahamians, like you said, we want to see, we want to feel, we want to touch you. And that may not be as easy this time.
It is not going to be as easy because the Bahamian people have become used to a certain kind of campaign. And it's going to be more difficult, but I understand the reason for the difficulty. People will have to still do what they can, social distance, walk house to house, as is the norm. But apart from that, this rally thing might be a thing of the past. But my view is that the Bahamian people, I guess, would over the last 3-4 years been thinking about what they're going to do, I believe. And most of them, in my thinking, have selected their choices. That's how I see it. That's how I hear it on the ground. And so, you know, maybe the campaign will only cement what the Bahamian people have already been thinking.
So we've already looked at how this COVID pandemic and all of the restrictions that come with it are going to impact the campaigning. How do you see it impacting what matters to the electorate? We're in a time unlike any other that most of us can imagine or have ever experienced. So the things that matter to us.
Well, I believe the fundamentals of life living still matter to the Bahamian electorate. The question for them has always been, and in this election cycle will be no different, am I better off today than I was 4 or 5 years ago? Am I being looked at or looked after by those who I have elected? Or are they just looking out for their friends and lovers? So Bahamians have some questions that they asked silently. And you only really know what the electorate is thinking the day of election.
Yeah, because you're, well, even before pandemic, because we'll tell you anything when you come visit, right?
Well, that's for sure, because a lot of shocks and shockers come out on election day. And so it ain't over till it's over. So you really never know what they're thinking because, you know, I find that sometimes those who are of the honest politics will tell you, well, Mr. Gray, you know, I'm supporting you this time because I supported the other people the other time and I'm disappointed. Some will say, I haven't made up my mind yet, and that is what they will tell you until maybe after election. Mm-hmm. So you just have to do what you got to do to sway them to think like you as a candidate.
So speaking of the candidates, you know, you've been down this road many times personally. A lot of new faces. This is their first time out the gates. What would your one piece of advice be to these new candidates, given what you see of the environment that they're having to operate in? What would be the one thing you would recommend they do?
Well, in a couple of words, people don't care about you if they don't think you care about them. And so my advice to every politician seeking election would be to show the people who you are asking to vote for you that you care about them. Because it's never about the politician. And unless you convince them and it's about them, they may just tell you take a hike.
How guarded do candidates and parties need to be, given the economic situation we find ourselves in as a country, in terms of the promises that are made in order to garner votes? You can't go promising the sun and the moon and the stars right now if the coffers are empty because of a pandemic.
Well, you know, for me, and I speak truth when I tell you, I don't listen to what people say as much as I watch what they do. And I think at election time, particularly the government, they will spend all that is in the treasury plus some, offering jobs here, offering contracts here, and to woo people to support them. The average opposition person will have to go either on his record because he has no public purse to assist him financially in the campaign. And so at the end of the day, the Bahamian people will go back in their minds and say, what you're doing now, is it just for my vote? And I hadn't seen you for the last 5 years as our MP, or whether they will be fooled by things you say and give you a chance which they gave you before, but you never intended to do good then. Neither do you intend to do any better if they gave you a chance.
So just go out there, be honest, and do the best you can.
That's what I think. You've got to be honest, as you always should be. But fooling the people with promises is always a downside for a good politician, because they hold you to what you say. And to be absent from the people for 3-4 years, and I'm talking about all politicians, and just show up. I'm not talking about the ones who are just coming out at the gate. I'm talking about those who were elected in particular, and just show up on the eve of election is not wise. I think it's foolish, really.
There's some chatter about the possibility of an early election. Carl Calmer, the FNM chairman, insists that he's been told no such thing, and May 2022 is where everyone's eyes should be. What would you say would be the benefit, or what are the pros and cons to the PLP side of an early election?
Well, the PLP don't have the date of election in their minds beyond what they see the government either does or it seems as they will do. When you bring in paraphernalia from outside in like T-shirts and this and that in preparation for election, that should speak volume as to what your intentions are. Now, I believe that the only person who holds the key as to when elections would be called is the Prime Minister. 5 years ago, he promised that he will give a fixed date for election, and that hasn't happened, as so many other things has not. But I believe the people held him accountable for that statement then, and they may still hold him accountable now, because everybody else must guess. So the only advice I could give to those who are hoping to campaign and win is to be ready for whenever it's called.
So yeah, so we really don't know where this is going, but certainly there's been no proverbial bell rung, but it sounds like everyone's geared up.
Well, the atmosphere is very, very ripe for election being called sooner rather than late. The government, I am sure, will, like I said, spend the public purse and to see what they could do to build support. But you know, these days, Jessica, the people will take your money and still don't vote for you.
That's always been the way.
Money may not do it. I think inside the people have to believe that you showed that you care for them. Now, I watched the present prime minister speaking to the pandemic and how he thought he handled it. And, you know, I have my own views on it, but you didn't ask me my views on that. I would just say this. You've got to do more than what you are duty bound to do. The prime minister is duty bound to do, in my view, what he has done or what he is doing to make sure the Bahamian people are safe. I think that's a duty. That ought not to be about politics. And I'm talking for Alfred Virginius Cornelius Gray. Those things that he did, it would have been expected that he does whatever he needs to do to keep the Bahamian people safe. They will be the better judge than I would. And I think when people have lost their business, when people are not sure what he will come up with tomorrow, it keeps the Bahamian people in a state of flux, because whatever information or order he makes, he does it almost without thinking of the ramification. My view is, Jessica, we're going to have to learn to live with this pandemic. And a lot of people are hurting. Mm-hmm. I see people towing lines on end for a $25 food certificate. We could do better than that. And I believe that, you know, when you make these orders, it has to be in the context of the effect of the orders, rather than just making orders because you have the power to do so. And I don't believe the present government, prime minister, has given much thought to the decisions he make. I know he loves to be called most honorable. I know he likes to call the competent, to be called the competent authority. And so he does it, in my view, in that context, because everybody must do what he says when he says it. But I do not know if he thinks of the effect of what he's doing on the people, on the businesses, on the country.
Okay, well, don't go anywhere. When we come back, we continue our conversation with the Alfred Gray. You're watching On the Record.
Every new season of On the Record, we push the limits, venture into unknown territory, take our cameras into places unseen before. We share the stories and experiences that affect us all. And now it's time for Season 5. On the Record, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on RTV, cable channel 212, and streaming live on Facebook.
You're watching On the Record, and thank you for staying with us for our final segment. I'm your host, Jessica Robertson, and tonight we're discussing the psychology of politics with former parliamentarian V. Alfred Gray. Mr. Gray, is the PLP doing enough as the opposition to be ready to become the next government of the Bahamas?
Well, I think they're ready to become the next government of the Bahamas, everything the PLP does, I believe they could do more. And I'm hoping that as time goes by, the intensity of the politics will increase. But a lot of people, in my view, have made up their minds as to what they intend to do during this election cycle. Because the campaign has not yet begun in earnest, I'm not sure that every cat that is in the bag has come out already. And so as we near election time or a date, I think the intensity will increase. But Jessica, allow me to just say this. When people are voting for a candidate, I believe they assess they assess them as they see them as a voter. A lot of people do not yet know Phil Davis as I know him. And so I believe he's got to try to do a little more, because people see him maybe not as an orator, but if you know Phil Davis as the Bahamian electorate would, sooner or later, they would find him to be very caring. He loves people. He is approachable. He is not going to be a promise maker more than a promise keeper. And so they are some of the qualities I believe a prime minister must have, because anybody can make a good speech. But after they make the speech, you can't meet them on the road and say hello. If they see you in need, they won't stop. That's not the kind of prime minister you need. You need a caring prime minister. He may not be a good speaker like the Christie and the Ingram and those, but I believe he has the compassion. He has the ability to see a need and fill it. And so I wish they will give him that opportunity.
So we have an interesting situation in the Bahamas whereby I can only vote for the person who is running in my constituency. I can't vote for Phil Davis unless I am in his constituency. Do you think that the Bahamian public this go round is looking very closely at candidates, or are we still looking at party and who the leader is going to be, and that's what's going to make the decision for us?
I think it's a combination of both, I think when you vote for a PLP candidate, you're technically voting for its leader as well, because you can hardly separate one from the other. So I believe that the Bahamian people are intelligent, and they will vote for the candidate who they think is the best of who is being offered. But I also believe in the back of their minds, they know if you vote FNM, you're voting for Mr. Menace's return. And if you vote PLP, you're voting to give somebody else a chance. And I believe they're smart like that. So I will leave that to the Bahamian people, but I don't believe they will separate it totally. I think they want a candidate in their area who shows empathy, who shows that they care about them and all of that. But I also believe that they're thinking, if I vote for Mary, I'm voting for Menace. If I vote for John, I'm voting for Phil Davis. And so they're not going to be inextricably not bound to each other. I think the Bahamian people are smart enough to know what they will get if you vote FNM. They also know what they will get if they vote PLP.
The PLP so far, I think, ratified about 18 candidates. I'm not entirely sure the total number. Lots and lots of new faces on the political scene this go around. What does that tell us about the strategy of the PLP in terms of winning over the electorate?
Well, Jessica, I'm glad you don't work for the Tribune, because the Tribune don't think so. The Tribune thinks that the PLP is just rolling over those old candidates they had. You may have seen that that release they made, but they play politics more than the politicians, so I expect that. But I'm glad you see the new faces, and perhaps you will soon hear new voices. And I think your question is, what would that do for...
What does this tell us about the party's strategy going into this election?
Well, personally, I feel that there's got to be a mixture of new and old. And maybe that's why we're in such a mess today, because most of the people who the FNM carried into the last election were new people in government. They knew nothing about government. They knew nothing about governance. And so we are in a mess because those whom they selected to run the country didn't know what they were doing. They still don't know, in my view. And so I believe the mixture is what you need, because the old will teach the young, and someday the old will move on the side and make way for the young. And so I believe the PLP is doing the right thing. I am not sure how the percentage will work out at the end of the day, but a mixture of young and old is the way to go.
Since we're talking the psychology of politics and elections, and in this very unique situation that we're in, I'm sure you've seen it. There's a lot of nasty stuff out there already on the campaign scene. I don't know who's putting it out there. I don't know if this is official or not. I hear different things, but it seems particularly gutterish, if you will, this go round, very early out of the gate. Why is that?
Well, Jessica, when you don't have a good record to run on, you must seek to destroy your opponent.
But it's both sides are coming out with it.
No, I'm talking, and I'm sure it will lend itself to what I want to say. Mm-hmm. I'm saying the gutter politics has no place, in my view, and I dare anybody to tell anybody that that's the politics Gray played. Never have, probably never will. And so I am saying to you, when you don't have a record to run on, you seek to destroy your opponent rather than to offer alternative. Because the PLP must, in my view, offer alternatives to this government. If this government has or had a good record, they can run on their record. They don't need them or their supporters to tear people down. That only happens when you are bankrupt of good ideas that the Bahamian people could buy into.
Politics divides us. We are very tribal as a little country. And this is a time, because of this global pandemic, where it feels like we really need to be able to band together to beat this thing. Can we afford politics as usual at this time without doing irreparable damage to the country?
Well, I don't think we could have afforded it from the time election ended in 2017. I think the Bahamian people want better from their politicians. And I would go on record as saying this present prime minister, and maybe prime ministers before him, some people would say, seem to want to run the country by himself. When a Hubert Minnis could reject the assistance of a Hubert Ingraham or a Perry Christie, it tells you something. Either they are not sure of themselves, or they want to make people feel like they know it all. Whichever way it goes, it's wrong. In this country, we need everybody's hands on deck. My view is that when the pandemic struck, the prime minister ought to have called the leader of the opposition publicly together with him and plot the way forward as to the solution, if any, that may be found. Tell me if you see that in evidence. If you're looking, you would say Hubert Minnis running the show by himself. He doesn't seem to consult. He doesn't think that the opposition have any brain. And so what you get is a one-sided approach to all of the problems which exist. And something is foolish about that, because it is very pragmatic and it makes good sense where national issues are concerned. that the opposition and the government work together to solve them. Because there is no government that has all the answers. And so to ask advice of the opposition or to allow them to give such advice that they have is very wise. And I don't see it. I don't hear it. I'm sure you, from where you sit, you don't see them coming together to find answers. But the leadership of such coming together has to start with the government. And if the government does not seek national advice from those leaders who've been there and done that, and I know this pandemic is the first of its kind, but trust me, people who have been in government before might know, if only, how we should approach it. But no, I don't see any collaboration in that regard. And I'll end on this note. The Constitution requires the government and the leader of the opposition to consult. I know it has not happened, save and except for those things which might not matter.
But some would say that Minnis did reach out and Davis didn't come. So I guess it's been on both sides.
You know, Jessica, you have to remember, people's got feelings too. And when you feel that you're being used to promote somebody else, you may resist that. See, you can't use me like a pot cake, you know. You know, I am talking about a systemic approach to governance.
Right.
If when you see trouble ahead, you want to tie me into it because you want somebody else to blame, you got to be wise enough to know when that's happening. And I don't blame Mr. Davis to look out for being hoodwinked or bamboozled, because if the prime minister was always including him, he would be foolish not to always be included. But when you see trouble at the end of the road, but you want to share it with somebody, certainly nobody would want to be used like that.
I hear what you're saying. Politics, 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 right?
That's the way it is. If you include me in everything that I should be included on, then I know I will be foolish to reject any inclusion. But when you're going to use me when you see trouble ahead, so I can share in the results of that trouble, I got to be able to know when that's being played.
Gotcha. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of On the Record, The Psychology of Politics. Special thanks to all of my guests for joining us, my technical team, and of course to you, our viewers. And before we leave, please join me in wishing a happy belated birthday to our executive producer and regular host, Jerome Sawyer, who celebrated on Sunday past. We wish you all the best, Jerome. And thank you to all of you at home. We'll see you again next week, same time, same place, On the Record.